Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to unpack one of the most consequential conflicts of the 20th century, the Chinese Civil War. So picture this. It's 1949. After more than 2 decades of absolutely brutal conflict, China literally splits in two. On the mainland, you've got Mao Zedong's communists declaring the People's Republic of China. Meanwhile, Chiang Kai-shek's nationalists flee to Taiwan and set up the Republic of China. This single event created the political reality that still defines East Asia today. So, the big question is, how on earth did one of the world's oldest continuous civilizations just break apart like that? Well, to really get a handle on the tensions we see today, we've got to rewind and go right back to the beginning. All right, our story kicks off in the 1920s. China's last imperial dynasty is gone, and what's left is this massive power vacuum. This whole period is known as the warlord era, and for good reason. The country was completely fractured, carved up into little territories run by competing military bosses. Now, out of all this chaos, 2 major groups pop up, and they actually have the same goal: unify China. You've got the nationalists, also called the Kuomintang, and then you have the tiny but growing Chinese Communist Party. And believe it or not, to take down the warlords, they team up. In 1923, they form what's called the First United Front, with a little help from the Soviet Union. But this was totally an alliance of convenience. It was fragile, to say the least. After the nationalist leader Sun Yat-sen dies, his successor, a military guy named Chiang Kai-shek, starts getting really nervous about the communists. So, in 1927, right when it looks like they're about to win, he makes a shocking move. He turns on his own allies, purging and killing thousands of them in the Shanghai Massacre. And just like that, the alliance is shattered, and the Chinese Civil War begins. So the alliance is toast, and phase 1 of the war is on. For the next 10 years, Chiang's nationalist army, which is way bigger and better armed, just relentlessly hunts down the communists. They launch these massive encirclement campaigns, and the goal was simple: wipe the communists off the map. By 1934, it was almost over. The communists were totally trapped, backed into a corner, and just on the brink of being annihilated. They had one last desperate option: break out and run. And that decision led to one of the most grueling military retreats in modern history. I mean, can you even imagine? A year-long journey. We're talking 12,500 kilometers over some of the most brutal terrain imaginable: mountains, raging rivers, treacherous swamps. This incredible, harrowing journey would go down in history. It became known as the Long March. And this is where the human cost just hits you. Look at these numbers. Around 90,000 people started this thing. By the end, only about 8,000 made it. That's less than 10%. An absolutely staggering loss of life. But somehow, they managed to reach their new base in Shanxi. But here's the crazy thing. For the CCP, this absolute catastrophe had a silver lining. The people who survived, they were the most hardened, dedicated fighters you could imagine. And out of this disaster, one man emerged as the undisputed leader, Mao Zedong. The Long March basically cemented his power. Okay, so Chiang Kai-shek is getting ready for what he thinks will be the final blow against the exhausted communists. But then, a new player enters the game. A much, much bigger threat that would change everything: Imperial Japan. You know, Chiang was so focused on the communists. He had this famous quote where he called the Japanese a disease of the skin, but the communists were a disease of the heart. But then, in 1937, Japan launches a full-scale invasion. And get this, one of Chiang's own generals actually kidnaps him to force him to stop fighting the communists and focus on Japan. It worked. He had to agree to another shaky truce with the CCP. So they formed this Second United Front. But let's be real, it was an alliance in name only. The KMT, being the official army of China, had to face the Japanese head-on in conventional battles. And they got absolutely hammered. Over 8 long years of brutal warfare, they suffered devastating losses. The communists, on the other hand, they played it smart. They mostly stuck to guerrilla tactics, hitting the Japanese here and there, but their main focus was on something else: expanding their own territory and winning over the hearts and minds of people in the countryside. And this strategy, it turned out to be absolutely brilliant for them in the long run. Okay, let's fast forward to 1945. World War II is over. Japan has surrendered. That fragile truce between the nationalists and communists, it evaporates overnight. The Civil War is back on, and this time it's faster and more intense than ever. Now, if you were a betting person in 1945, you'd probably put all your money on the nationalists. I mean, on paper, they had everything. More troops, way better weapons thanks to the US, and all the major world powers recognized them as the real government. The communists? They had a lot of people, sure, but their equipment was pretty shoddy in comparison. So that brings us to the million-dollar question. How did the communists, the clear underdogs, pull off a total victory in just 4 years? How did it all fall apart so quickly for the nationalists? Well, it really boils down to this. The nationalist government was a mess. It was riddled with corruption. The economy was in a tailspin with hyperinflation that made people's life savings worthless overnight. Meanwhile, the communists were out there making promises that people wanted to hear, especially the peasants. They promised land and stability, and millions of ordinary people flocked to their side, becoming the backbone of their entire war effort. And once the tide turned, the end came incredibly fast. In just a few short months, between 1948 and 1949, the communists launched 3 gigantic campaigns: Liaoshen, Huaihai, and Pingjin. These weren't just battles, they were knockout blows that completely destroyed the best troops the nationalists had. After that, it was all over for the mainland. So, on October 1st, 1949, you have this iconic moment. Mao Zedong standing in Beijing, proclaiming the founding of the People's Republic of China. A couple of months later, Chiang Kai-shek and about 2 million of his supporters escape, fleeing across the strait to the island of Taiwan. But here's the key thing to understand. That retreat, it didn't end the war. It just pressed pause. The shooting mostly stopped, but no peace treaty was ever signed. No armistice, nothing. So for the last 75-plus years, the two sides have just been locked in this tense standoff. And that is why all of this is so important today. This unfinished war is the direct origin of the whole two Chinas problem. It's the root cause of one of the most dangerous geopolitical hotspots on the entire planet, the ongoing tension in the Taiwan Strait. So we're left with this really unsettling question. How do you find peace in a war that never officially ended? And what does the future hold for the nearly 1.5 billion people who are still living in the long shadow of this conflict?